Something's wrong, right? Things haven't been what they used to be in a while now. Or are you finally noticing things are just wrong and always have been? It can't be pinpointed in any meaningful way, but you feel it in the depths of your being. Things are amiss. A toad, when placed in a boiling pot of water, will immediately jump out. However, a toad placed in a lukewarm pot will gladly cook itself if the temperature has risen to a boil. I often think of this metaphor or analogy or whatever literary device you'd like to call it when thinking about us as a species, humans, and our relationship with the tolerance we possess towards harmful environments. This is a broad reach metaphor, so to narrow it down, I'll talk about war as an example and lead into how we can become disconnected from society and even globally impactful events, ignoring the boil, so to say. Disconnections from the ones and things around us are not directly tied with the wars your countries wage and the problems we create on the national level or even global, but the personal. Climate change is too obvious, but I guess the topic also relates to the frog metaphor mentioned earlier. I'll be using war as a transition point to show the human condition on loneliness, moreover, and touch on specific examples of varying scenarios. Being a small creator, I can analyze or really just voice my opinion on war without caring what my subs have to say. In fact, I hope I have subscribers who differ in opinion than my own. Echo chambers are shown to turn creators into douchebags. Recently, hashtag not that recent, on the world stage is the Israeli-Palestinian crisis that's affecting us globally. Last year it was the Russo-Ukrainian, but I'm not involved/informed enough to feel I have a right to share an opinion on who's right and who's wrong. If you put a gun to my head like an IDF soldier though, I would say that from an outsider's perspective, looking in, it's a David and Goliath story where there's like two bigger Goliaths throwing fat stacks at a smaller Goliath as he pounds David, the already defeated David I might add, into further submission. Like I said, this small position I hold allows me to speak freely, going on without the fear of losing income or quote-unquote fame. I don't want to take a detailed look at any particular war, but war in general. I'm not a journalist, these are my takes, they're not objective, and they're not biased free. This video, as with most of my videos, isn't the undisputable fact, but there will be no misinformation on my part. This video is also sponsored by me, because let's be honest, not even Adam and Eve would sponsor this jazz, especially since I already said the demonetizing I word. Not that I'm monetized, but still. With introductions out of the way, let's get into it. My name's Gideon, and I'm going to tell you why you're lonely. As I understand it, every conflict has sides. Not picking a side or abstaining is still making a choice. We're too well connected for you not knowing what's going on to be as consequence-free as it has been in the past, at least to the outsiders. In this conflict, in every conflict really, there are the soldiers, fighters, warriors, whatever you call them on both sides. Whether they be labeled terrorist, fascist, freedom fighters, or liberators, they're two sides to the same coin. I had a history teacher in the 7th grade, Mr. Burke, who was the first to tell me one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And that had me really questioning the mentality that, damn, we sure got lucky with the good guys winning every major war. What are the odds? Well, if you're leading a country, right, then hi, the odds are high. The victors write the history books. That's another quote. He didn't tell me that one, but yeah. To simplify, the positions of an exert of forces clashing to justify an end goal is how wars are fought. This is a heavily reduced rendition of the nuances and complexities that come with war, boiling a person's identity down to those who fight. Limitless factors during these times produce ethical dilemmas left and right, unaccountable human lives reduced to numbers. Expanding further, soldiers of one side could very well be slaves, mandatory conscripts, child soldiers, prisoners of war, etc. This leads me to state not all fighting forces are the same or equal, but all wars rather have a force of fighters. There are thousands of ways to end up in a war you didn't want or need. Even Whitey isn't safe in the land of the free. They need to enforce, well, some freedom. We're going to war means you're going to war. Soldiers are only one factor, one side, when it comes to the art of mass violence, and despite whether we can admit it to ourselves, the end goal of fighting is to make something bleed. If reduced down to its simplest elements, a war is created to cause casualties to an opposing force. To declare war is to declare the temporary or even permanent total annihilation of your opponent's goals and resources. Wars can span from several factors, but in the last 100 years, we've really limited ourselves down to national borders, ideologies, and financial gains. The leaders, chiefs, commanders, NFL teams, generals gathered in black masses. Whatever you call them take the shape of politicians, and these are the people who are most vested in the end goal completion of whatever conflict is going on. The United States, and really most first world countries, have a bit of a war profiteering problem. Have you heard of this? When it comes to American politicians, it's on both sides of the Democratic and Republican parties. In order to avoid singling any group out, I'm just going to point the finger at everybody. You may have heard of this small little company called Lockheed Martin. They got in trouble for bribing Allied nation officials so their governments would buy the F-104 Starfighter, an overall halfway decent plane whose only real downfall was its poor turning ability. The planes weren't the problem in this scenario, but the bribing sure was. I work with a former Marine, but there really is no former. Once a Marine, always a Marine, who got to have some first-hand accounts with Lockheed while building air defense radars over in Afghanistan. Needless to say, they were not as good at assembly as they were with designing. The quote that my coworker mentioned that stuck with me as he held a crescent wrench up to the operator was, "Do you know what this is?" Lockheed wasn't the first to engage in this type of shady behavior, but is the most obvious, being an arms manufacturer/defense company. This video isn't a financial investment guide, but if you want to make money off war like all the cool kids, or better yet, a US senator, you may want to do this thing called fractional ownership of these very expensive stocks right here. During events like the attack that occurred October 7th in Israel, you can expect some kind of rise in stock price. They're diversified enough you'll find some kind of profit, which is sort of the entire point. Here's a list of politicians, or chiefs as I refer to, who invest in Boeing, one of those companies who profit off war, which is funny in a not very funny way when we saw a bump in the stock price after the whole attack on October 7th. Coincidence? I think, well, probably, but you decide. Let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Take all the sides you want, whether you're for supporting or opposing Israel. It just looks really bad when you've got cold hard cash on the line. It feels like one may not be doing it for morality's sake entirely. What I mean by this is one's judgment may be clouded, turning from the less lucrative ceasefire, disbarment, or peace talks for a full-out military supply line/conflict. When war is declared, it's done with the understanding that people will be killed as a result. As callous as it sounds, this is even the objective on occasion. This is where our next group comes in, the calculated casualties, or really, the victims of war. Countries like Russia that are going through a population crisis can't afford to lose many civilians, as the nation's people are thinned out as is. Countries like Japan were so good at war, they're not allowed to play anymore, so there's a zero tolerance for that sort of stuff by the nation's civilians. Countries like the US can't lose any civilians not because of a population crisis, and not because we were too good. There's actually a bell curve that if you make it to the other side, you're back on the board as a warring nation. Here's the chart. See the US, see Japan, and over here on the left you can see all the countries going through civil wars. Pretty well concise. The US can't lose civilians because if we're sacrificing special programs like universal health care and free college education, we expect some unique perks, especially with the amount we pay in taxes. If people were dying left and right from foreign IEDs in my own neighborhood, I might have more to say about the trillion-dollar military-industrial complex and all my taxes they keep losing. However, I live in America, and the only threats we face these days are domestic, like the white supremacists and eco-terrorists, which we still can't decide if it's a gun problem or a mental health problem, as if somehow they're mutually exclusive. Don't believe me on the terrorist groups? Look it up. Here's a chart to start you off. That's 3. The fighters, the leaders, and the casualties. There's one more subsect of this little war political compass I'm building, and unlike the other 3, they don't even have to know the war's going on. The bystanders. A war, despite having global consequences, does not have battlefields spanning globally, leaving those 7,000 miles, or 11,265 kilometers, for the rest of the world out of their realistic harm's way. Y'all should just get on the Imperial. I use a foot to measure things. 12 inches. A foot. An inch? What the fuck is that? This gives a privilege to not be in the shit every day. Having the plagues of warfare consuming your every thought isn't a realistic consequence. Instead, the everyday for the people away from the war takes over, and we become a frog in a boiling pot of water, not really worried about our survival or the war, but how this pot could be bigger, newer, and better. This is where most of the disconnect happens. Let's say you're born in a country where wars managed to evade your borders for at least you in your parents' lifetime. I was born in the US in 1990X. I've had my fair share of the US's treatment of the Middle East creep in, but there's this disconnect of Vietnam being your grandparents' war with a 20-year run. Gulf War maybe could have been your parents', but relatively it was quite short and not as grand scale, versus yours being the Iraq-Afghan war spanning another 20-year run, assuming you're 18 to 25. You live through a couple of conflicts happening on the other side of the globe and think to yourself, well, nothing changed for me from the last one. so I really shouldn't worry about this one. This was especially true with those who fall into the Gulf War time frame. If you look back, did you really give two shits about the Somalian Civil War, or did you even know about it at the time? Probably is well covered. Eventually on this slippery slope, a select few, who whether they be uneducated, uninformed, or conscientious objectors that believes in pacifism, just throw up their hands and say, who cares? It's terrible, but understandable. These people who don't have the luxury to care for global affairs have their own first-hand problems that are a more immediate cause for concern than a war that doesn't seem any different from the ones in the past and the ones coming down the pipeline. I'm not a psychopath, I care for my fellow human, and the sacred rarity that is all life isn't lost on me. I pick up the bugs and let them outside even with the risk of being bit on the horizon. I condemn the actions of all violence, so when I'm told people are slaughtering another across the world, it's very alarming, even for those who wouldn't be considered quote-unquote my people or tribe. You may think you can abstain from a war, boycotting the global affairs that seem to have no direct impact. However, that isn't entirely true. You can ignore the gas prices easily enough. Coming from personal experience, I never look at the price of two things, beer and gas. Of course, I keep these two purchases' direct activities and effects separate, but what about the people? In this scenario, a person has taken a laissez-faire approach to the outside world and trade for the closer realities of family life, one's career, and personal aspirations and dreams. It's harder to ignore what's happening when your immigrant coworker that you've worked with for the last 5 years is suddenly gone, having to go back to fight for what he believes is worth dying for and what you believe is unimportant. I worked a seasonal gig as the scrawny teen who tied Christmas trees to your roof one winter, and I met a father whose family was back in Iran. That same winter, something popped off over there and he had to go back, telling me he doesn't think he'll be able to get back to America. And it was good working together. I never saw him again for the rest of the 2 years I had worked there. I think about him sometimes, and at the very least, we were work buddies. This is a disconnection of circumstance. He chose his family instead of his shittiest job here in the States, and I can't blame him. And just how some of us don't think, or in other words care, what's going on in Iran, he probably doesn't give two shits about little domestic terrorism, gun violence situations going on here, much less know about them. The creeping effects of what you think was once irrelevant come back to bite you in the ass, especially if you're not updated on the potential ramifications. Refugees fall under the human casualty domain of my previous analogy, and are often a hot-button issue, especially for Europeans. Not just Europeans. Refugees, not too dissimilar from America's border crisis, spanning from asylum seekers, which are totally different from refugees, is a complicated issue altogether. I think a lot of the time, those opposed to accepting refugees are often in the mindset that these quote-unquote outsiders want what we have. They want to bring their war-torn beliefs and ruin our peaceful nation. Well, guess what? And I'm only going to say this once. Most people only want to come to your shitty country for the sole reason that you live in a place where bombs don't fall from the sky every day. Most folks are pretty simple. We need so little to survive to even have a halfway better life. And there are those that have enough to share. More than enough. Participating in this whole thing called life already sets you up with a responsibility to try and help your fellow person. You benefit from those around you. You get running water, utilities, grocery stores, housing. Not because those around you wanted to solely cater for your needs, but because we care for our fellow person, and the concept of a grocery store alone proves that you should try and help others and be a contributing member of society. As evil as we make capitalism out to be some days, one of the perks is that you're rewarded for your contributions to the bigger picture. However, one of the downsides is that freedom to spend and share rewards can cripple our ability to empathize with those who are unable to do the same. Looking back to what I just said, your contributions are rewarded. Rewarded by who? Other humans who have found what you have done has increased their quality of life. In a way, it's a contrived formula where currency, fiat currency might I add, is a reward for how you've made lives better. Then why is it those that live in excess of this currency often don't seem as down to earth as the rest of us? I have a theory on this. Bill Gates is one of those people. But why is that? His developed software has greatly expanded the technological evolution of humanity, but his lack of personal social skills along with some rather dicey friendships has thrown him into this light of being a shadowy cabal member set on world domination. This is because, in my belief, all the Elon Musk and Bill Gates of the world have made a rather poor decision with their self-image. I believe billionaires have equated their financial standing with how much people feel they enjoy their work, or better yet, how much they are liked in general. I think that however much is made off the Cybertrucks will just be an ego boost to Musk. Furthering on the consequences of being connected, calling a senator and sending a letter is great if you're firm in your convictions toward what you believe in. But to those who wish to prevent mass human suffering, it's hard to be a partisan to a singular side. It's frowned upon to say, I don't like these aspects of both sides, I like these on both sides. The world is a majority black and white in the court of public opinion. There's right and wrong. You essentially set yourself up for living in doubt about the choice you made either way. What if you supported the wrong side? What if you didn't support any side and now you live with the guilt? Sometimes it's easier to live under a rock and hide from the world thinking it'll be over soon enough. This is also often the case when trying to connect with the outside world on an individual level. And in a lot of ways, this is what this boils down to. It's a big scary place out there and it's hard to feel helpless so far away, or know that any day now, a war you didn't want or start will end with nuclear Armageddon. Are you going to blame a single mother just trying to make the rent payment stack to the ceiling for not being able to give as much attention as possible to a war that for her is on the back burners of her mind? Additionally, most countries have a war-torn history. Would you blame a survivor of the Bosnian War for not wanting to become involved in another war of borders so soon? This relationship of war and disconnect can be translated to the everyday if the war is made to be a social or familial issue. If you're barely surviving check to check, then meeting up with friends and family becomes less important than getting hours in at work to feed and shelter yourself. If you're dedicated to a singular goal or achieving a dream, disconnecting can be viewed as making sacrifices in most cases, showing discipline and dedication. But there is such a thing as a fine balance between dedication and obsessive self-destruction. Or let's say you have depression, and you're just trying to stay alive till the end of the week. Things are ultimately going to slip through the cracks, and eventually it's 9 months later, and your social life is non-existent. There seems to be 1,001 ways to lose a connection with someone, changing jobs, arguments, different beliefs and convictions, but there only seems like one way to make a connection with someone, and that's letting yourself love and be loved, or at the very least, liked. What's so hard about reconnecting? We've done it before. When we're born and assumingly are given the basics of a family, and then later friends on our own account. The family isn't immune, however, either. Life happens, and grandchildren move away, creating a distance that doesn't help you see them as much as you'd hope to. This can be applied to parents, siblings, and the like. It's the ones we let be in our lives the closest that can hurt us the most, even if indirectly. The random guy you see every day while getting your coffee is much easier to avoid than, let's say, your mom. To understand how we connect in the first place, we have to look at the brain. There are 4 parts of the brain responsible for how we interact with friends, families, or even just acquaintances. The 4 parts of the brain responsible for this are the ventral striatum, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. So all you have to do is master conscious control of these 4 parts of your brain, and you'll never be lonely again. Despite how modern day has seemingly changed us, we're pack animals. We like being around each other and always have. Grouping up, despite the challenges that may follow, is sort of our whole thing. So is the perceived threat of going without and limited supply that leads to tribalism, but still, we're pack animals. In order to make this happen, there has to be some kind of positive biological feedback for the connections we're making. This is why you feel good when you're spending time with friends and family, and there's a reason engaging in activities, overcoming challenges, and sharing common interests feel good. It's the same reason locking yourself away in a room, on the internet, or playing video games all day is linked to poor social skills, and after a while, feels bad. It's a good evolutionary trait to be able to easily connect, and some of the ways we can build healthy, long-lasting connections is getting out there and finding those with similar neural responses. Funny enough, people who perceive events like stimuli the same are more likely to become friends. The phrase, "you're born alone, you die alone," isn't necessarily true. You have to go out of your way to go against the biological programming that says make friends or find a tribe. You're never really alone. You can see this in a quote by Michael Collins, an astronaut who went to the dark side of the moon.
I don't mean to deny a feeling of solitude. It is there, reinforced by the fact that radio contact with the Earth abruptly cuts off at the instant I disappear behind the moon. I am alone now, truly alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life. I'm in. If a count were taken, the score would be 3 billion plus 2 over on the other side of the moon, and 1 plus God knows what's on this side.
Even when you're feeling lonely, you're never really alone. There are people around you. Your family, your friends, the world more generally can still get to you. Speaking on tribes further, you can see the importance of fellow human commodity when examining the case of the Neanderthals. Bodies of these human ancestors have been discovered with wounds that required intensive medical care over a period of time that also occurred prior to their death or did not lead to it. We can determine this from mummified scar tissue present in the bodies we have found, meaning that tribes members would care for another, which isn't an uncommon animal trait, but cats will often leave weaker members of their group behind if an injury is noticed, showing that we do care about our fellow man. It's important to find one's tribe to feel fulfilled in life, however, it's also equally important to recognize the immense challenges we must overcome in order to make this happen. I moved around a lot as a kid, so I'm pretty good about smelling out my own lot. I look well adapted and typical, but if I'm being real with you, I gravitate towards two types of people. The new kids like me, just because they haven't conformed to social pressures yet of the new area, and the weird, the outcast of the already standing area. I noticed I never really enjoyed the politics of the mainstream, but would debate about why, if given a proper build, monks would totally body wizards in D&D 5e. Another point relating back to the earlier discussion of war is that the Bosnian survivor translated to the everyday in this case may be someone getting out of a bad relationship. They're not eager to reconnect to a possible negative relationship again, even if it's not romantic. It's funny enough, but if you had a best friend who you are no longer friends with, you may be hesitant to bring a friend into your life to that level and that soon after. Additionally, at times, distance is necessary. Getting space from the overwhelming factors of the real world can do some real good. But like we've also discussed, there's a fine balance to find by each individual. This disconnection from the world can also span from deeper factors like depression or anxiety. People are quick to look for those who are different. It spans from our own insecurities most of the time, but still, the fact remains. This gives those who have disabilities like chromosomal disorders, amputations, really anything that takes on a physical aspect, and even after time, psychological and behavioral disorders, are a real hindrance with making connections. By pretending to not address certain aspects of this person's personality or disabilities, you're being weird. If someone in a wheelchair comes into your place of business and needs to grab an item from an elevated shelf, there's this whole debate that the disabled person has learned to do it themselves, and by helping them, you're demeaning their efforts versus just asking if they need help. Personally, I just ask. What's the worst they're gonna say? No thanks, I got it. They know they're disabled, I know they're disabled, we are both aware of the situation. I am sure this person has like a claw to grab things high up, and if not, you shouldn't assume they can't walk. Most people in wheelchairs are ambulatory, but still, they might appreciate the assistance. Same with anyone who experienced some form of physical challenge like palsy or dwarfism, the rules apply. They've done just fine before you encountered them, I'm sure with their own personal challenges and victories like everyone else. Ask if they need help, connect, shoot the shit. I find most disabled people are pretty quick to break the tension with a joke about their disability. I think I've heard this one multiple times, but old guys in wheelchairs will come up and they're like, my nickname's Hot Rod. See, that one's pretty good, you know, like nothing, like, if he claims, I can't call him Hot Rod, but if he's saying it, I'm not going to call him that. I'm just like, good joke. Widening the analogy, if you have a loved one who has some kind of chromosomal disorder like Downs or even autism and is on the spectrum, you're aware of how each case is unique and requires a unique approach. And when we really get into it, doesn't everybody? You don't treat everyone the same. They have personal interests, hobbies, dislikes. So why start here? Even for the abled, social norms are a bitch and constantly changing from the day to day. With social media setting a lot of them, participation on the internet almost seems mandatory. Keeping up with the latest celebrity drama, TikTok trends, and your favorite YouTuber's latest controversy is exhausting. So no wonder people are announcing that they're leaving Twitter by posting on Twitter, only to return after a couple of months because they have no idea what anyone's talking about. I went on a cabin trip with the end goal being wild terrain skiing. I was awful at it, but while up there, Stephen Hawking had passed, and for 5 days, I had no way of knowing because of self-service. Only to make it back down to civilization and have my dad check his phone to go, holy moly, Stephen Hawking died. It's hard to reconnect to even activities or people you once found enjoyable after losing touch for a significant time. When disconnected from people spanning from factors like distance to traversal free time, there's often hesitation from both parties to reconnect. If contact is reestablished with either activity or person, things can seem different. You may not get the same enjoyment you once did. You may find the awkward stages not worth the friendship or interest in hobby. Our brains also haven't evolved alongside the internet, so when it comes to trying to get back out there, it's best to stick to tradition and go out and interact with people rather than people through a computer or phone. One of the things that could be what disconnected you in the first place. With all these obstacles, it's hard to keep up with everything, to be connected with everything. But every once in a while, come up for air. Pull your head out of the sand and see how much connection you can get out of the world. You'll notice things you never even knew were right in front of you. I didn't list everything to be on the lookout for, but it's a part of being a connection master to spot some of the things I mentioned, but also to be cautious for disconnectors that are unique to each situation. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Merch can be found in the link below. Thank you so much for watching, please comment what you thought, and peace out.